give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
Don't center on your anxieties, Obi-Wan. Keep your concentration here and now where it belongs.
But Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future.
But not at the expense of the moment.
Bury your feelings deep down, Luke. They do you credit, but they couldn't be made to serve the Emperor.
Believe it.
That is why you fail.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for coming. This is a 9 a.m. class. The turnout is not that bad as I expected. I see some of my other students, not from personal and professional development, from OB, HRM, and also from pre-masters. Some of you are here. I guess all of you have got this topic in common, either for your coursework or probably for your dissertation and business project over the summer. Before I begin, I'd like to say that I thought of starting with that clip from Star Wars, Lessons from the Jedi. I'm not too sure if I could show you the 2 other clips, but I'd just like to point you out that there is a clip on 5 leadership lessons from Star Trek and Captain Kirk. I think this is an excellent video. I could have played it, but this is 5 minutes long, so I wouldn't take this time, but please do watch this video. It's very sharp and straight to the point. Another one is, I don't know how many of you ever watched a Charlie Chaplin movie. Anybody watched a Charlie Chaplin movie? Okay, lovely. Some of you, great. So this is a 5 minutes clip from The Dictator, one of the best, well, all of them are best, but this is a great clip, about 3 minutes long. And this talks about a little bit about aggressive and charismatic leadership, what they are. Some of you have got leadership in the previous term. I suppose you had leadership and teams, managing teams and groups. So you'll catch some of the points that I'm going to talk about. But before I begin, I would like to give a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is this microphone. I'm not sure. Guys at the back, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, lovely. You have to say yes, because when I say come and sit at the front. Hello, Jerry. Come, join us. All right. So before I begin, there's a disclaimer. Disclaimer is this particular subject of study, research, leadership. There is so many contributions in the field that it's just impossible to summarize everything in 50 minutes. So my plan is to keep it not so technical. If you've studied leadership before, then you know some of the theories and theoretical contributions, but I'm going to keep it slightly basic to start with. But I do supervise dissertations and business projects. So if you're writing anything on CSR, strategy, leadership or entrepreneurship, please do come and talk to me after the lecture. I'm always looking forward to listening to new ideas and some of the key topics in this area, not just the theories of leadership, but gender and leadership, change and leadership, strategy and leadership, CSR and leadership, also risk and leadership. These are the emerging areas of interest in this particular field. So if any of you are writing a dissertation on any of these topics, please do come and talk to me because I'm happy to supervise. So welcome once again. Especially thanks to people who skipped the breakfast and came this early. So my name is Rick. Most of you know me from your seminars, either this term or previous term in autumn for global business, or you might have seen me in your previous years if you studied your undergrad degrees at Sussex. So I'm a social scientist with special interest in leadership, entrepreneurship, CSR, and strategy. Also an international speaker. Besides, I also run my own company, which is looking at renewable energy solutions to businesses and think tanks. So without further delay, I would like to summarize what are we going to do today. So first of all, definitions of this particular topic, leader and leadership. Is there a difference? How do you define it? Because open any textbook, or go online, you might end up with 10,000 different definitions. It's useful to remember at least one definition that is considered to be comprehensive and widely accepted. And some of the emerging issues as well, the things that I just said, gender and leadership, for example. Secondly, we'll look at some of the attributes, some of the seminal piece of work, some of the contemporary in this field, traits and behavioral approaches. Third, the significance of situational influences, especially contingency theory and path goal theory. Some of you may have heard about this path goal theory and its relevance. Some of the new trends in leadership thinking, transformative leadership thinking, charismatic LMX's leader-member exchange theories. And I will touch briefly on the importance of negotiation and power towards end. Although these two are itself, they are quite big topics. So there are modules for postgraduates and undergraduates specifically looking at negotiation and power throughout 13 weeks. But I'm going to spend probably 5 or 6 minutes. So I'll highlight some of the key contributions so that if you're interested, you can look up and you can get back to me later on if you are interested. So needless to say, the next workshop for this particular module will also be looking at leadership, some of the exercises, and I will be picking up on some of the emerging trends I'm going to highlight today. So make notes. I'm also going to use a lot of examples throughout the lecture, so keep track of them. You can recycle them in your exam and also a dissertation if you're interested. So to begin with, first of all, the definition of leader and the difference between a leader and leadership. The clip that I played from Star Wars Jedi and also the Charlie Chaplin clip and the Star Wars clip, I've given the link at the bottom so you can find it out later on if you're interested over here. So this is one of the widely accepted definitions of leadership over the past about 10-15 years in contemporary leadership literature. The person who is appointed, that is, you're given that power, let's say CEOs, elected, let's say Pope for a church, or informally chosen, for example, leader of a labor union or a trade union. These are not necessarily formal positions in the hierarchy of an organization. These are informally selected to direct and coordinate the work of others in a group. Now, you might observe these two words, direct and coordinate, these two are also the roles of a manager. Yes, not just leaders. But this brings us to this important quotation that we know from seminal piece of work. All managers are leaders, but not all leaders are managers. So if you are a manager, it is a part of your responsibility to lead teams, to lead your subordinates, to lead your employees. But in order to exercise your leadership power, you don't need to have a formal position. You don't need to be a manager because this is something innate, some of the traits that you carry as a person in your personality. So these two are typically the roles of a manager, but this is also something that you do if you are a leader. This particular author, Fiedler, he also devised this Fiedler's contingency theory. So he's a seminal author. The person who is appointed, elected, or formally chosen. I highlighted this particular definition because this is pretty comprehensive. This is pretty comprehensive because it tells you pretty much about the whole scope of leadership. Next is the concept of leadership, the process of influencing the behavior of individuals or groups towards the achievements of organizational goals. I would like to emphasize here the importance of aligning individual goals with organizational goals. This is in particular quite significant. Alignment of individual goals and organizational goals. And then the attempt is made towards achieving them. So it is associated with the personal qualities. This is the trait theory that we have got in history, behavioral theories, styles, and also in contemporary literature focusing on decisions adopted by the leader in a particular context. This is where the contingency theory comes in. So that's the difference. So if you are writing on leadership, whether it's in the exam or in the dissertation or business project, start with a widely accepted definition of leader and what is the difference between leader and leadership. Pretty much, if you are working on a research project, it is important to differentiate what is the difference between method and methodology. Yeah, so the study of methods, you've got the methodology, the concept of methodology. So that's the first. I think you know the lady on the background, the CEO of Soho Group, Jamshin, and she's also an alumni of the University of Sussex. So a brief timeline of the leadership approaches. 1930s to 50s, the school of thought believed in the trait theory, particular specific characteristics that individuals had. But let me just point out, before the 1930s, before Frederick Taylor and some of the other founders of the academic subject of business management, we had another theory, but very few literature is available out there. It was called the great man theory. Before the 1930s, we had the great man theory. So leaders are born. That is the biggest assumption of the classical leadership theories. Leaders are born, they cannot be trained or made. So leadership characteristics, the trait theories were particularly quite popular in the 1930s and 1950s. This microphone is a bit spooky. I'm going to maintain some distance here. All right. Next came the 1960s, the emphasis on behavioral theories, not on trait theories. This is where the understanding developed that leaders can be trained and made. You don't have to be a born leader, otherwise you cannot be a leader. That concept was going. So leadership behavior became very, very important. So this is where the behavioral theory kicked in after 1960s. And then came this author, Fiedler, the same gentleman I used the quotation from. He came up with the idea of the contingency theory, that it is not particular characteristics or features that individuals carry or the things that they can develop over time. None of them are sufficient, because some of the decision making, role playing and leadership decision making process depends on the context. So there is no one right style of leadership that fits all. So this is where the contingency theory came in. Effective leader features and behaviors depends on the context or on the situation. This is more towards the contemporary literature. Finally, post 2000s, you have got the importance of influence theories, and we discuss a lot of concepts regarding power, negotiation, conflict, and these can be broadly grouped under the umbrella of new theories. These are post 2000s, and as I said, the contributions in this field is substantial, and under each of these categories, if you look at the timeline broadly, there's enormous literature out there. So let's say if you're comparing two leaders from two different points in time, or if you're comparing two leaders with similar characteristics but from two different industries, you might find out a lot of differences as well as some commonalities. So first of all, timeline is important. Second is the context. Third is also the industry. The way leadership works for the same organization, if you're looking at sales and marketing, might be very different if you're looking at research and development or accounts, for example. So across industries, across different levels of the firm, and also different timelines. So some of the assumptions that trait theories were built on initially, that leaders have got distinct physical and also psychological characteristics, and this in particular is very, very important, the EQ, emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. You might have already heard about the importance of EQ test. If you're applying for a job these days, it is absolutely essential, mandatory, that employers will carry out a psychometric test on you, as well as take an EQ exam besides the conventional IQ test that's been there for the past more than a century. Now, this particular features extroversion, conscientiousness. This might remind you of a model that you have got in the literature. This is the theory called the Big Five personality test. This is once again, this is the test that managers are asked to take from time to time, because the score changes over time. So there is no one fixed result that you can stick to over time. The results do change and vary. So these are the 5 features that you've got. Extroversion, as I was saying, agreeableness, how sociable and well connected you are, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. These 5 are the indicators of the Big Five personality. This test, you can take it online and it's free. But interesting again, as I said, if you keep taking the test from time to time, every 6 months or every year, the results might vary. So there are websites that gives you the score, whether you score high on the top 3 factors, extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, or neuroticism and openness. This theory is also important if you are engaging in a team activity, or if you're working in a group. Because if some individuals or some staff members are scoring very high on neuroticism, that means those team members, it's difficult to reach a consensus. It's difficult to reach the same decision because of this high index in neuroticism. So take this test and see what kind of questions they ask you when you are taking up the Big Five personality test. Also the importance of intelligence, self-confidence, and also emotional intelligence. So these things are typically looked at if you're looking at the importance of trait theories. So the basic assumptions here is, are leaders born? Is it the case? How many of you might believe that leaders are born and they cannot be made? This is a very big and probably vague assumption if you are a believer of behavioral theories that came much later. Some criticisms of this theory: no universal traits that predict leadership in all situations. This also gives you some idea of why the contingency theories and the contemporary theories are important, why this theory lost significance over time. Traits also do not guarantee leaders' effectiveness. It's a good leader or unsuccessful leader. How do you measure the success of leadership? This is also quite important. And also does not give any emphasis on the followers. And there's another famous quote that says, all great leaders are also great followers. Yeah. And this, just to point out, if you're using the word leader, it's safe to use the word follower in the same sentence. Try not to use the words leaders and managers in the same sentence. We typically tend to use academically managers and subordinates, managers, employees, and then leaders and followers. That's kind of appropriate. So that's the first theory, 1930s to 50s. Next one is the shift towards behavioral theories, where the importance was given towards leaders' observable behaviors. 3 steps were designed to identify the behaviors of a leader: observing, that's the first stage, and then categorizing the behaviors in particular contexts, and also determine which behaviors are most effective at certain points in time. Again, at certain points in time, which brings out the importance of the context, not just the decision-making nature, but also where you are, which markets you are performing in, which industry you are in. Are you a good, effective team leader, or you are just a good leader for the organization? Yeah, early days of Steve Jobs, if you look at his biography, you might find out that he was a great leader in terms of leading the company, but I'm not too sure how many people actually wanted to work with Steve Jobs as a person, because he was a difficult leader to deal with. But then again, some of the nature of leadership, for example, aggressive leadership style, might be good for the organization, but not for employee motivation. That's why I was saying it's important to understand how do you define or how do you measure the effectiveness or success of a leader. There are lots of tests and questionnaires available these days that helps you to measure the effectiveness of a leader. Again, another popular figure on the background, you've got Jack Ma from Alibaba. There are several studies carried out on behavioral theories. I picked a few here. Michigan University Leadership Studies. This is one of the dominant studies done. If you go online, if you're reading a book on leadership, you will find at least there are 7 schools of thought, 7 different kind of studies carried out that came up with different approaches that leaders tend to have. So the first one that you can categorize under behavioral is the production approach, or the production focused, or task approach, as we can also say, task-oriented approach or production-oriented approach, where output matters more than human interactions or human relations. Staff motivation and employee motivation is secondary. So emphasizing technical or task aspects of the job in particular, so the focus is more on the output rather than the entire outcome of the process. Main concern was in accomplishing their group task. You will find some similarities of this kind of leadership approach back in the 1930s and 40s, if you're reading on Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management theory, where the importance was given on the final output rather than the bigger outcome of your activities. Second approach is the employee-oriented or the people-oriented approach, emphasizing interpersonal relationships. And we have got some other theories in the classical management literature, especially the theory given by Elton Mayo, Human Relations School, where the emphasis was given on the importance of interpersonal and intrapersonal communication at workplace and why this is important. So taking a personal interest in the needs of the employee and accepting individual differences amongst members makes a substantial difference in the final outcome. Once again, if you're looking at the task-oriented, this is output-focused. Employee-oriented or people-oriented, this is more about the outcome focused, because you're looking at a larger outcome, not just a particular output at a given point in time. This is far more long-lasting. So there's a lot of focus these days, if you look at organizations spending millions on continued professional development, sending out staff members for training programs, leadership development programs, motivational speaking, lots of motivational speaking going in London every time in the O2 Arena or the Excel Arena. motivational speaking. So continued professional development, ensuring that your skills are up to date, and you go out, you take the training, you build your new skills, and you come back and you apply them, you practice them, you grow, your organization grows at the same time. So it's a mutual process. So these are consequences if the organization is having an employee-oriented approach, not just a production-oriented approach. It also differs from industry to industry. I'm going to take a few examples in a moment. Now, so none of these theories, whether it's a trait theories that was back in the 30s to 50s, and then behavioral theories post-60s, were enough to define the traits, the particular features of leadership. So that's where the importance comes of situational influence, the contextual reference. Trait and style theories, this is behavioral. In other words, you can also use the word style theories, synonymous. Pays no attention to the situation. Some situations require certain leadership behavior. So the one that I would like to focus on is the fourth bullet point here. Leaders must be flexible and able to adapt to their behaviors to match the situation. Which timeline, which industry, which department, what is the nature of your workforce. The study of leadership is absolutely nothing without understanding the concept and importance of followership. Who are you leading? What kind of teams are you performing in? Which markets are you in? And what is the nature of your followers, which might change from time to time. There is no standardized format of hiring followers. Most effective leadership style depends on the leader, the followers, and the situation. This is where the importance of contextual factors comes in. And right. This particular theory focuses on this particular belief that leadership styles can be learned. So leaders are not necessarily born. That was the assumption of the trait theory, not the behavioral theory. But this one is looking at the belief that leadership styles can be learned over time. You don't have to be a born leader necessarily. Some of the new situational influence approach came up with dominant theories. For example, Fiedler's contingency theory. This is a useful measurement that we use these days, the least preferred coworker scale. This is based on about 16 adjectives, very short term, like pleasant. How is it to work in this organization? Pleasant, unpleasant. Are you a happy employee? Are you unhappy? Quality of leadership. Do you interact much with your supervisors? A few questions that tells you about what kind of leadership you have. Generally, it is asked to the followers, not the leaders. Least preferred coworkers. It also judges that once you start working for an organization, you tend to get close to some employees more than others. And you also measure that who is the least person that you tend to work with because of certain behavioral tendencies or some of the training or background that these individuals had in the past that makes them the least preferred coworker. Once again, this test is available online. So if you want to take the test, it's free as well. So you can see what kind of questions they ask. Because for your dissertation or business project, you might have to develop your own questionnaire. So it's useful to know how questionnaires look like and how many questions should you realistically have before people get bored to answer. Try to keep it under 10. And what should be the scale of questions, scale and scope of the questions. So if someone scores very high on the LPC, least preferred coworker test, then it is generally believed that the organization has got a people-oriented approach. But if it's low, structural focus, the focus is on the task and the production. So these two are the consequences of this test. So go ahead and take this test. If we get some time, I'll try to add this particular test as a part of our workshops for this module in the next week. So you can see what kind of questions they ask if you're taking LPC. Although this was made quite some time ago, but if you are using sciencedirect.com, how many of you are using sciencedirect.com for your journal articles? Okay, just try to forget Google Scholar because it doesn't really show you 4-star or 5-star business publications. Go to sciencedirect.com. They tend to share only 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star journals. So they are highly academic, relevant, validated, and reliable. So use Science Direct for your coursework because Google Scholar basically shows you everything that's out there it might be a very low quality article. So in order to avoid that risk, go for sciencedirect.com. Please make sure that you type it correctly. Don't use Sports Direct or Sussex Direct. Leadership style interacts with the situation. This is where the importance of contingency comes in. Leader-member relations, trust and building trust and ensuring likeness. Task focus, which is ensuring clarity, and also what is the nature of authority, what is the concept of power, how is it measured, what are the different kinds of power. So leadership style interacts with the situation. One of the things that you focus on heavily in leadership literature is understanding the nature of group dynamics. Group dynamics, once again, focuses on the followers. Some of the criticisms again, although this is fairly recent, can situational variables be measured? Because some of the variables are uncontrolled. Is the LPC concept well understood? There's a school of thought that believes that questions are highly subjective, so this doesn't ensure the accurate calculation or measurement of the quality of leadership. Are employees' needs considered? How do you understand needs across different cultures, across different markets? And also, is the leader's level of technical competence considered? Who defines it? Who defines it? And is it a fairly standardized thing, or it differs across industries? Technical competence. Because every single leader, even followers, you tend to have a set of general skills as well as some specific skills. So you've got a functional role in the team, and you also carry some individual role as an individual in the organization. If you take the test, Belbin test, we did that in the exercises, you might have seen that we have got a functional role and also an individual role that you end up with. So how you are as an individual and how you add value to a team when you're working with others. Once again, the big 5 personality test that I shared a few moments ago and Belbin test, the results will change if you take the test again after 3 months. Whatsoever your results were last time you took the test, it's probably going to change after 6 months because of your changing perspectives, your experiences, your understanding of the concept of group dynamics, people, and your own approach, personal approach. The next theory that came into prominence was the path goal theory. Specifies what a leader must do to achieve high productivity and morale in a given situation. 4 leadership styles are identified. Directive style, communicate expectations, scheduling work. Some typical industries that you could take examples of, it could be automobile industries and banking industry. Once again, I'm generally speaking, banking industry and automobile industry, this is a typical kind of leadership style that you might expect, although there are exceptions clearly. Next is the supportive style. You get to see this in consultancies, in education industry. Create environment to support, express, also there is a space to express concerns. That's where the supportive style comes in. Once again, these are the styles and approaches. These are not the types of leadership. Because if you look at what are the types of leadership, you might find aggressive leadership, democratic leadership, transformative leadership that I'm going to show in a moment. But these are the different styles that authors have identified over time. Third one is the democratic or participatory mechanism, participative style, shared decision making. One of the important industries that I would like to focus on is the not-for-profit sector. You might have seen that there is a tendency to look at profit-making industries even for your coursework, and we end up looking at the same companies over and over again simply because of the fact that data is easily available for those companies. You go online, you find a lot of literature on Coca-Cola, Apple, Microsoft, so on and so forth. But it is also important to understand that there are other sectors, for example, not-for-profit, that would be an interesting piece of study that you do, something different that you could work on rather than the conventional companies. It also makes a big difference for your grades. So probably it will be interesting if you look at Oxfam or British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research UK, Greenpeace International, these organizations. You'll also find some organizations that are running for not-for-profit without any commercial objective, with a social objective. You can still run an organization with a social objective, yet making sure that you've got your operational expenses covered. Although most of the companies that I just took the names, they are not for profit, but they still need to survive. So you need to make sure that your operational expenses, day-to-day expenses are covered so that you survive, basically, and then you function. as per the expectations. So participatory style of leadership, where decision making is shared. But another industry where you will find that this is very common is if you look at, broadly speaking, the innovation industry. If you look at the innovation industry, how participatory mechanism or bottom-up kind of power structure is visible. Bottom-up power structure is visible because if you look at the directive style, this is where you come across the top-down approach, pretty much. Somebody takes the decision at the top and the decision is shared across the filters and you just do what you are told without any space for improvement or to add your own input. Whereas participatory style, where decision making is done collaboratively, importance is given to teamwork and group performances, and ideas are taken from all across all different levels of the hierarchy. Whether I don't need to take specific names here, but if you take examples of Google, Facebook, and also some of the organizations that are developing key softwares, let's say Symantec, it's a prominent organization making antivirus softwares. Symantec was recently in the news a couple of weeks ago because they're diversifying recently, not just making antiviruses, but also other forms. So how this democratic performance, how this participatory mechanism work is important to understand. Fourth one is the achievement-oriented style, setting challenging goals, expecting high levels of performance. One particular model, kind of a framework, not a model, that I would like to point out at this stage is the managerial grid or the leadership grid that we know typically. Bless you, my dear. 30 minutes of my lecture and people are falling sick already. It's a good sign. All right, so this is the managerial grid, and you will see there's two dimensions that we are measuring: concern for production and concern for people. We just talked about this a few minutes ago because I was talking about whether you're output focused or you're people focused. So this is the output focused, high concern for production or low concern for production, or you are more into concern for people. You've got a long-term approach. That's where some of these leadership styles are observed. So if you've got a high concern for production and low concern for people, this is a task management approach. This is also called produce or perish, perform or you're gone, right? And there's a low concern production but high concern for people. This is called country club management. Generally speaking, big organizations that are hugely diversified can actually afford to go for this particular style of leadership style because it is possible. But again, when I said big organization, I'm talking about the scale and scope of organizations that you measure not by looking at how much profit they make, but also but more importantly, how many people they hire. How many people they hire distinguishes what's a big organization, what is a SME, small and medium scale enterprise, and also which markets you are in. Also, whether you are in a collectivist society or you are in a highly individualistic society, you might remember the theory of the framework of Hofstede's cultural dimensions from last term if you had global business or international business. So individualistic society or collectivist society, that also determines which approach might generally work. And if you've got a low and also simultaneously low concern for people, then good luck. This is where you belong. But there are organizations where you will find this type. It will be interesting if you can come up with some examples where you will find things. So these two, team management, where you've got a high concern for people, high concern for production, you possibly could take examples like Virgin. I'm using Virgin as a brand, not any particular product line that they make, but also any hugely diversified organizations like IBM, or even some banking organizations that are recently coming up in the banking sector. But this one is a rare to visit phenomena, impoverished management. So that's one of the theories that you could use later on. So some of the theories and measurement criteria that I've shared so far, you have the LPC, least preferred coworker, Belbin test, Big Five personality test, and this is the managerial grid that can be used for your future coursework. But so that's the final one, achievement-oriented style, setting challenging goals, expecting high levels of performance. And generally speaking, you get to expect this in sales and marketing departments, where this is quite strict. And also if you look at the insurance sector, banking and insurance sector, where this is kind of an expected or general belief that leaders have got an achievement-oriented style. Although this is a contemporary literature, yet they have got their own criticisms, too complex to consider, because once again, although we differentiated 4 different styles of leadership, but there is no one style of leadership that can be followed in an organization, because it might change from time to time. Who is the leader? That also matters, because there's a leadership change. If the leadership change, then the culture of the organization might also change. 2 things that actually can change the culture of the organization, as you probably know by now, that culture is not built overnight. It takes time to embed, to sit at the core. So 2 things that effectively can change culture over time are leadership and innovation. These 2 are the drivers that could potentially, effectively, gradually change the culture of an organization. And also not sufficiently tested. There's a brilliant article on sciencedirect.com that talks about the limitations of path goal theory, and then what is the way forward? What kind of theories should we be looking at and believing in for future leadership studies? So some of the new theories, post path goal theories, is recognition of the role of informal leadership style, especially the boom of the innovation industry in some specific countries, the move of some of the sectors in specific countries. For example, if you look at Japan, historically, you might guess which sector, which industry was prominent, but then if you look at their plans for 2020 and 2025, there is a shift towards the service sector. Service sector, away from the manufacturing and the industry sector. This is a new phenomenon, and given the importance of formal sense of hierarchy and how power distance work in some of these countries, it will be interesting to see how the concept of informal leadership is developed given their background and history. So this is where the recognizing the role of informal leadership is important, not just which context you are in. So clearly all these theories that we talked about, trait, style and contingency theories, are inadequate. The reason why we talked about all these theories, trait, behavioral, situational, path goal, is if you're working on leadership for any of your coursework or dissertation, it is essential that you have got a very strong, well-built literature review. Very strong literature review that enables the reader to understand that you have read the literature that's out there historically, and you also know what are the limitations and which style of leadership you are addressing or emphasizing. Now, another kind of leadership that was ignored in the past, that neglected the theory that leaders provides a vision. A vision describes a better tomorrow. So you got the concept of visionary leadership that is contemporary. Also neglected the issue of how leaders' behavior is perceived by whom. I've raised a question here because we talked about the importance of followership when you're looking at leadership. But is it only the followers, your employees, that determines the quality and success of leadership? Or there is some importance given to other stakeholders that measures what kind of leadership you have in the market and how you're perceived? If you look at the leadership style of Virgin, all of us know about Sir Richard Branson, but also if you compare the organization Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, the perception of a leader for an organization might affect how many people want to work for you in the long run, and what are their expectations from the organization as a whole. Perception of leadership or the perception of the leader is important. Some of you may know this guy at the background, which is the CEO of Tencent, which is a huge company. Some of you are looking at WeChat as I speak now. So that's another successful company. Next one is, that's Richard Branson from Virgin. Transformational leadership. And there are lots of literature on this particular theory because in the past 10 years, there's a heavy focus on looking at this particular style. 4 components of transformational leadership. First is the IC individualized consideration, treats each follower individual and helps them develop. Once again, if you go back to this particular managerial grid, you will find that this is where it belongs, country club leadership style, or also in some cases middle of the road, where you can't really assign a kind of leadership specifically in one grid. It might be a mix of a few. So second one is intellectual stimulation, challenges followers to develop and grow. This also defines what is the nature of the organization that you're applying and working with, what is their long-term expected outcome, not just short-term objectives or mid-term goals. Inspirational motivation encourages followers to achieve goals, setting examples by their action. And finally, the importance of charisma, leads by examples and takes responsibility for his or own actions, because it is important that the leaders focus on the role and importance of the followers. Every time a company succeeds, you will see the CEO of that company on the Time magazine or Forbes magazine's cover. So if the company fails, you tend to see the same face again. Yeah? But effectively, whether it's a success or it's a failure, it can be accrued to the team, not just to one specific individual. So if you succeed, you take all the credit, and then something goes wrong, you might blame my accounts division was weak, my marketing didn't work out well. So sharing the credit and also the risk and the failure is important. Some of the criticisms also raises some questions. Does suitability of leadership depends on the situation? This is where the contextual factors comes in. Do transformational leaders resemble cult leaders? And finally, does the leader actually form and articulates an appropriate vision? Is it a shared vision, or is it just a vision of one person, not shared effectively? Because if it's a plan, you can share it by paper because it's easy. But if it's a vision, you actually see something, it's difficult to bring other people on board. That's where one of the challenges lie. So what is this charismatic leadership? It's a special quality of leader. Again, this is something innate, kind of a trait that you carry, whose purposes, powers, and extraordinary determination differentiate them from the rest, and also become symbol of the organization. Now, this is particularly important if you're studying organizational culture. If you're studying organizational culture, there is another model that I would like to quickly point out. It's called cultural web. Cultural web, and this is how it looks like. Some of the factors, some of the variables that this particular model carries, symbols, rituals and myths, and also paradigm, which is built as a consequence of this story. So stories in the past, whether you're looking at organizations that are really old by age and experience, IBM, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, for example, some of the organizations that have got a long history, the examples that the previous leaders have set in history determines the perception of the companies in the eyes of the employees and also prospective stakeholders. So if you're looking at the biography of Sir Richard Branson, and some of you are reading that book, I know that you said that you borrowed the book from the library. There's a chapter called Dirty Tricks. Dirty Tricks. Virgin experienced a very hard, difficult time, the challenge from British Airways when they started out. And how did they cope with that problem? Did they win? Did they lose? I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but some of the historic episodes in an organization's history determines the way people perceive that company. Whether it had done something good or negative affects the way people think about you, and then it attracts a lot of new stakeholders, including employees and shareholders. Clearly, they are the two most important stakeholders. So this is a very interesting model and useful model, cultural web, where you could talk about leadership and how these symbols and rituals and myths are developed over time. Style of leadership is one factor, but change in leadership and the nature of organization as it evolves over time also sets the tone how people perceive your company. So leaders' influence extends beyond their immediate work group and also reporting relationships. This is why you eventually become a symbol. This is a long-term thing, but this is significant. Some of the other features of charismatic leadership style, if you are interested, just look at some of the factors here. But two of the most important factors that I would like to point out here is the environmental sensitivity, making a realistic assessment of environmental constraints. Some of the factors that are controlled, some of the variables that are uncontrolled over a period of time. Macroeconomic changes are generally beyond your control, but changes that comes from within the organization can be controlled or mitigated to some extent. And the second most important factor is the masterful communication skills to inspire people and their trust. This also takes time, doesn't occur overnight. And if it's built, it stays for a period of time. It's not also gone. That's why the importance of trust. We looked at the importance of trust and building mutual understanding in organization in our workshops, the first workshop for this term, and we also focused on why communication skills is the single most important skill that comes before leadership or other skills that employers look for when they are hiring candidates. If you need more information on charismatic leadership style and how this is measured, go and read some of the recent issues by Harvard Business Review and Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal and Harvard Business Review, that's where they published quite a lot on these particular topics. Criticisms often taken with celebrity charisma. That's one of the limitations. You can take examples of leaders from all different sectors and industries. It doesn't have to be necessarily from the business sector. All right. So if you're into sports, probably you've come across some of the news on David Beckham in the past couple of weeks. That's one of the things that you could look at. Now, this is one of the most contemporary contributions in this field, the leader-member exchange. You should start from here. When you are appointing a group of employees in a given team, you look at their strengths, you look at their weaknesses, and based on those SWOT analysis, you give them certain roles. Once they start working, some of the employees tend to get more favor from the line manager because you don't let them down. Your skills particularly fit that particular role that you've been given. This getting close to your line manager either takes you to a in-group or you fall in the out-group. Leaders do try to reach out to both these groups. People who are close to the line manager because they believe in their skills, they've got more trust in their abilities, capabilities, but other members who are not that close to the line manager falls in the out group. Once again, this is a consequence of your performance in the first several months or years and tend to see how well you are getting along with your employees and also leader that drops you in either one of these groups. And the final one is a formalization, routinization, where you are stable in your job. Some of the effects of this leader membership theory is positive emotions at workplace have been linked to positive individual behaviors. Some of you may know the theory of expectancy theory of motivation that talks about how much effort you are putting in and how does it affect your final performance, and what are the factors that affects and determines the level of efforts that you are willing to put in over time. Leadership also plays a big role, both formally and informally. Felt energy at work, which is a subjective vitality, is associated with increases in creativity and innovative behaviors at workplace. I have taken this quote from Atwater and Carmeli because this is a key author. You can find the article online and it's free. It's a great article to understand a bit more about how do you measure the energy at workplace and how does positive motivation affects positive individual behavior at workplace, behavior, attitude, and also approach. Some of the criticisms, clearly if you are in the out group, unfortunately, appearance of discrimination against the out group might come at some point eventually. That's why I said leaders still should make an approach to reach out to both the groups, not just favor some of them in particular and ignore the rest, which does happen in reality, but that's one of the limitations. Some ideas are not also fully developed. Very quickly, some of the concepts of power. This is a huge topic, and some of the forms of power. You've got the legitimate. I've just taken an example of teacher here, but you can take examples of other sectors. Where does power come from? What form of power do you hold, and do you share any of your power through delegation or decision-making approach? First is the legitimate power when you're given a particular role, and some of the power that comes with it. Reward power. This is where the carrot and stick approach comes in. This is also where we talk about the importance of transactional leadership styles. We talked about transformative, charismatic leadership style. Third one is transactional leadership style, where carrot and stick approach works. Coercive, this is ability to punish. And fourth one is expert power, based on your knowledge or competency or superior capability in some area that gives you some kind of expert power over others. Not just comes from hierarchy. This power might not necessarily come from hierarchy. This might be an individual thing more than a rank thing. Finally, referent power, perceived as caring, best interest of students. For example, if you look at the teachers, but this is also built over time. The reputation that you build over time might give you access to newer resources, newer communication channels, and how you build relationships over time. So finally, negotiation and why we do it. Negotiation might happen at 3 different levels. Power conflict might also happen at 3 different levels. You've got the power leader negotiation and conflict, leader follower negotiation conflict, and follower negotiation and conflict. So it's leader follower, and follower. These are the 3 levels where conflicts and negotiation take place over time. And the nature of conflict is also different, because power struggle is also a constant phenomenon in organization. So introducing a new technology, is a very good case study if you want to understand how this thing works and why it's important, is this guy, the guy that you see in the background, Tesla's Elon Musk. He introduced the whole idea of PayPal, online payment, PayPal. This is how he developed. And so many challenges that was that he faced, as Tesla faced when he was developing this idea. How many different kinds of companies that he had to liaise with, how many stakeholders he had to struggle with. Eventually, you come up with a output, which is PayPal in itself, which is the final product. Now it's quite easy. You've got Apple Pay, you've got Alipay, you've got lots of other modes of payment that's out there, making our lives easier. Not too sure about the privacy element, but it does work. And also, this concept is important if you're looking at mergers and acquisitions. And from last term, I believe you know the difference between a merger and a takeover. Takeover is acquisition, not the same. Why do you do it? So these are some of the realistic, real-world situation where negotiation happens on a day-to-day basis. You're negotiating an important contract with the customer. What should be your main aim be? To find out and secure the highest price that the customer can afford. This can happen in any sector from a day-to-day business life point of view. So that's some of the questions that you can look at. I think the way I've just highlighted these questions, what is the point of negotiation? This particular thing, to maintain a friendly relationship, even if that means discounting the price, has been someone's dissertation topic a couple of weeks ago. That person was looking at Acer, the laptop maker company, and looking at how they maintain the relationship in different markets, and the role of sales managers and particular branches of Acer in the UK. That was the question of that student. So think about a little bit more about these topics and questions, and see if you can come up with a new solution, new addition to the literature that could add some value. Thank you very much. Have a lovely week ahead. Thank you.